it didn't take very long once I had started tutoring for me to recognize that what was underlying so many of my students' challenges was executive functioning issues. That's what I try to impress upon my students is no matter what grade they're in, this is just practice. This is practice for the thing that really does matter to you. This is practice for the challenge that presents itself when you're on the path toward what is meaningful toward you.
But the question is, what can we do to make this time valuable? And it is about that learning to learn piece, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How can I develop the executive functioning skills that I can use the rest of my life? So how did you end up in the tutoring realm? What drew you to that space?
So I have a bit of a winding story, and I'll try to keep it brief, but I majored in psychology in undergrad, and that I would say is my true passion. But of course, I was at a big university. I didn't have a lot of direction. I had no idea what I would do with that degree upon graduating. So I did what any lost soul does, and I went to law school. And I there found kind of my niche in family law because it really hit upon some of the things that had interested me about psychology. And I had, prior to that, all I'd ever done was babysit. I just loved being with kids. I loved working with families. And I was like, yes, I will practice family law. That will be fantastic. And this was in Champaign, where family law was practiced in a certain way. I come to Chicago and it's practiced in a very different way. In Champaign, it was very collaborative, and at least what I saw was very friendly, it's a small community. Everybody from the lawyers to the parties are going to see each other again, probably have similar friends. Everybody's always working together. There's like one family law judge, so everybody comports themselves in a certain way, which is very, very different than how it's done in Chicago. And I'm not sure that there's not corners of cordial practice in Chicago. I just didn't see it. So temperamentally, that was not for me. I'm not that big on conflict, and I definitely saw my goal in helping to mend a family, helping to heal a family. That was my interest. Not prolonging the divorce as much as possible. So the fates sort of aligned because I graduated from law school in 2008, and my job fell through and all my friends' jobs fell through. And it just gave me this chunk of time to kind of reflect upon what I wanted for myself, what I wanted for my future. There were no jobs to be had anyway. So somewhat in an act of desperation and somewhat in, I kind of call it this like American Beauty moment. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the movie, but Kevin Spacey goes and gets the job with the least responsibility. And I decided to start babysitting again. My parents had a neighbor who had an infant, and it was wonderful. And I just kind of reminded me how much I loved being with kids. So I did that for a couple of years. I went back to school to get my teaching certificate in pursuit of, a career in education now. And I realized when I was student teaching that I still just really enjoyed that one-on-one relationship with kids. And so upon getting my teaching certificate, that was the route that I pursued when it came to education. I picked up some tutoring students, and it didn't take very long once I had started tutoring for me to recognize that what was underlying so many of my students' challenges was executive functioning issues. I didn't know the term at the time. I didn't know that it was its own set of skills. I just saw that they were all struggling to get their assignments in on time. They lacked systems to keep track of their assignments. So that was sort of where we started to put our time and energy and our focus in building these habits so that they could find success, and so that the actual subject matter deficiencies would be illuminated in a more in a clearer way. We could actually tackle them. If you get your homework in on time, but you still don't get anything right, well, then let's talk about the math. But if you got a 0 because it never made it to your teacher's desk, that's a totally different issue. So I was doing that for a minute, and it became increasingly clear to me that if a child was having difficulty managing their executive functioning, often mom would forget that we had an appointment or would have trouble getting her bill paid on time. And so I just started to see how this was holistic, and it was a family, something that I wanted to address with all parties of a family, if we could. The more involvement we got, the better. And to my mind, there's something so empowering and so meaningful about a parent saying, like, this is something that we struggle with, or this is something that I struggle with. I'm going to work on it too. We're going to work on it together. And so rather than seeing it as a deficiency, just a skill that needs to be practiced like any other skill. So that's kind of how I landed where I am now, working with families on executive functioning and trying to do traditional tutoring and test prep through that lens.
So you're the owner of Chicago Family Tutor.
The Chicago Family Tutor, that's right. And
how much do you work with, like, one-on-one with young people versus with families? Is there like...
I try to encourage all families to be involved. I tried I was a little bit relentless earlier in my career, and that was not as effective as I would have hoped it would be. And to be honest, executive functioning is near and dear to my heart because it's something I myself have, it ebbs and flows, and I've seen where deficiencies have hurt me in my own life. And control is something that I have definitely latched onto, and sometimes to make up for that. So I sort of had to take a step back and say, like, I can't make a family do what I think they need to do. Let's instead try to meet everybody where they are and help in the way that we're asked to help, and as much as we can. So today I encourage all families to work together, but oftentimes I'll get a call that says, like, please help my kid. And that is what we have to go on. And that's how we approach it. And, I encourage parents to maybe be a part of a 15-minute conversation in each session. And sometimes they are game for it, and sometimes they're not around when we have our sessions. And so I've worked to make this a little bit more fluid in terms of accommodating every family so that they get the most out of our work together.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? Because you can see the broader challenge, and how much it could help not just the parents' executive functioning, but also just the relationships in the household.
Yeah.
And for them not to want to bite. It's interesting, but I think in our culture, as a parent, you feel this responsibility to always be the source of information and always be kind of the rock and the authority figure and a place to go. And so very few people that I know of are actually vulnerable with their children, right? Where it's like, where you open up the doors and, like, I didn't know my parents were people until I was like 30.
Right? Yes. You're like, oh, this explains so much.
You're like, oh man, you were 23 when you had me? Like,
oh my goodness, yeah.
And they were old for having kids at that time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it was just a fake it till you make it. And you want your kids to think highly of you too. But I think one of the most valuable things you can do as an adult around a young person is share your story, be vulnerable, and open it up, because young people today, and it's probably been this way forever, well, maybe not forever, but who knows? It's been this way for some said period of time. That how can you build that relationship when it's built on one of, like, I am going to take care of you, I'm going to keep you safe, and I've rearranged my entire life in order to do that.
Right.
It makes it much harder than that kind of, like, we're in this together type approach.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is another driving force in my work with kids, is that I always joke that Starbucks says they're your third place, after work and home, then you've got Starbucks. And I like to consider myself and the work that I do with my students kind of their third place. They've got their teachers, they've got their parents, and I hope, obviously I hope our work together is effective and meaningful in terms of developing executive functioning. But I also hope that the students I work with consider me a safe person, a safe place to come and to, know that I'm not going to judge them. And I don't expect things of them, except that when they do make mistakes, that we can reflect on it and think to the future, how might we do that differently next time?
And I really appreciate you doing that, because in today's culture, between school, homework, sports, there is no time when you aren't being judged in some type of way. There doesn't feel like that safe place of where you can just go be you. Every time you do a slip up, someone's there to tell you about it. It's hard to find that kind of acceptance.
Yeah. And it's so crucial for kids, the importance of play and making mistakes. And I was really struck. I was listening to one of your more recent podcasts about a child hanging up a coat and you saying, yeah, that works, and that's what I try to give my students time and space in our sessions is like, if you want kids to take action themselves, you have to let them experiment and find the way that works for them. You can have perfection, but you may not get follow through, or you can expect perfection, but that really involves a lot of parental involvement, and to do it the way that you want it to be done as a parent, that means you have to do it. But if you give your kids some room to fall down, make some mistakes, learn some lessons, there may come a time when they take ownership of it themselves, because they trust that whatever they try may not be successful, but it won't be ridiculed or corrected. They won't be embarrassed by it. They'll have the space to learn from it.
Yeah, I don't know how long the theory's been around, but self-determination theory is a school of thought in psychology that to build that kind of inner compass and that self-motivation, people need to have clear challenges so they know kind of what needs to happen. They need to have the resources and skills to do it. And they need to know that if they go after it and they fail, someone's going to be there to pick them up, give them a hug, wipe them down and help them get back into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. That's what I always encourage parents, regardless of their level of involvement in our work directly. I really try to encourage parents to not shelter their children from the challenges that may confront them, but rather to be the soft place where the kids can land if things get off track, and to offer a sounding board to problem solve and reflect and devise a plan for next time.
Yep. How are we going to learn from this? Right.
Right. Exactly.
And sometimes that's another way, like we have people come into the schools and we ask them to share their story and, what's your hero's journey, and share about sometimes where you may have fallen down, and everybody wants to, it's almost like a job interview, right? Everyone wants to share the story about I fell down, but then I got up so much stronger and I went back in and
right. And then I was the king of the hill and the end.
Big applause line. And that's just not how some of it goes. Sometimes you take a beating and you kind of get back up and slink away. And sometimes that's just the way it goes, right?
Absolutely.
We can have aspirations and we can push ourselves towards those, but we also need to accept sometimes things just didn't go our way, and go back and lick our wounds and figure out a new path.
And that's what's really important to me, I guess, is helping students to develop that quiet self-worth, the feeling of I've got this, I'm capable, I'm competent, regardless of what happens outside of me, whether I fail, whether there's applause, or whether it's just like quiet contentment. I feel okay with who I am and how I do things. And I know that I can confront the challenges that present themselves to me.
And that's the type of mindset that we work on it's not about building, but it's enabling Greenfields, right? Where it's like, here's the challenges, we believe in you. We often believe in you more than you believe in you.
Yes.
But go out there and give it a chance and build a community that shows, like, when people see you trying hard and you fall down, they're not going to point and laugh. They're going to pick you up and say, good job. Is there anything I can do to help you? Or, hey, I tried this if you want to try that sometime. Or, give feedback loops is something that is not well nurtured in conventional education, right?
Absolutely,
your feedback loop is your grade, right? Here's my paper.
Right, yeah.
There's your C. Too bad, so sad. Let's move on.
Right.
And I remember I never gravitated towards writing. And so I remember in college, I was like, all right, this paper, I'm really going to focus on it. And actually, we can go back to high school first. So the most effort I put into a paper in high school was probably junior year. And it apparently was obvious to the teacher that I didn't put in much work into my writing prior to that, because the feedback I got in red pen was fluffy, questionable original wording. So now I put in enough work, and now you're going to say I'm plagiarizing. That's a
nice way of accusing you of plagiarizing, at least.
Right? Questionable original. I'm not saying it isn't yours, but it certainly doesn't sound like anything you ever wrote before. And in economics, I can't remember which class it was, some economics class in college. Again, I'm like, okay, I really care about this topic. I'm going to put a lot of work into doing this paper. And it comes back, and I can't remember the name of the paper, but then it was like, by, comma, Rob Hughey. And he circled the comma that I had there and said, an omen of things to come. So instead of all this original thought I put into this economic theory, I just got hammered with grammar.
Oh, my gosh. How discouraging.
And I think that's we as humans, we project, right? And so it's like, my experience must be the same experience everybody else is having. But I can see it in young people that once they're first starting to write, a lot of that writer's block comes from this fear of, I'm putting what's in my head out on a piece of paper that anybody can read.
Yeah.
And how emotionally vulnerable am I making myself in this moment? And I think that's one of the key reasons of not pushing grammar hard when they're young. You're gonna get to it, right? We'll get to that. But if you can tell a story, if you can get those ideas in your head out on paper, and you feel confident about that, it's the same thing with professional authors, right? It's you have a copy editor, you have a team who's working on that side of things, right? It's get your story out. And And so that's what we try to focus on. Of course, then all the parents are like, they can't spell at all. Did you see that comma splice? It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
I know. That is something I'm definitely torn on, because I do, that is tested for the selective enrollment exams. And so I applaud in some respects the decision not to really beat that drum. But I also think if you're not going to teach the kids how to do it, you can't test them then on it. It seems like a double bind there. But I absolutely agree. And I'm not sure what author, maybe Anne Lamott or, someone of that nature calls it their SFD, and she doesn't use the word shoddy, but that's the word I use, shoddy first draft. And it's, I think, and I was just as guilty of this as a student and as a writer, of thinking that you sit down and you write a perfect paper, and then you submit that and you're a genius and you've done it perfectly. And then you hear professional writers talk about it, and you joke about how writing is editing, and you get those thoughts down, and then you work tirelessly to rework it. And unfortunately, I think writing is really difficult to teach to students, because again, it's just something that comes along and takes time. And I always kind of laugh when it comes to executive functioning skills or something like writing, how we have this awareness that a musical instrument is going to take a long time to get good at. And a sport is going to take a lot of practice, and you just continue to show up. But we do not have that same mentality when it comes to learning things and getting better at, academic skills, at least as far as I can see. Again, I work with students who just are so quick to say, I'm not a good writer. And it's only because they sit down, they want to write a paper in 30 minutes, they want to turn it in and get an A. And that's really just not what writing is, or at least not how you write successfully.
It's like art. Like, how do you get, and I saw this on a transcript, like a first grader who got a C in art. Like, how do you even come up with the grade? Like, I don't, and then I feel like so much of the teaching and the curriculum style ends up being a paint by numbers type thing to make it easy for everyone. We have the 5-paragraph essay, right? And this is what needs to go in what order. I'm just airing all my old laundry today too. Another paper that I got, I was proud of. I wrote in the, what would be the second person? I always get all those people confused. But it wasn't first, so it was like you, right?
Second person.
Yeah, so it was second person. And I thought it was great. And the feedback I got was, you don't write in the second person.
But I do, so that's first person.
But I did. Now, this is the same teacher who he liked to think of himself as a funny guy, and so he's up at the front of the class, and he says, "The humor in this class," and I said, "leave something to be desired." And he took the old school eraser with the chalk still on it and hurled it at my head, and I caught it right in front of my face in like this plume of chalk dust.
Wow!
And it was just like, I've had the most interesting experiences with instructors.
It sounds like it. I was in a classroom once where a teacher also threw an eraser. That must have been something that they stopped teaching in education school, because I was not there the day that was taught.
All right, so here's the PE portion of teaching. Here's the appropriate way to throw an eraser.
But I appreciate you saying that, the paint by numbers, because I do, and, to air some of my own dirty laundry. And I feel like that is what I perfected. If you look at my grades of every iteration, every time chunk of my schooling, whether it's middle school, high school, or college, I started off shaky, and by the end was getting straight A's. So really what I think I learned is how to succeed in that particular time and space. And so that is another reason that executive functioning is near and dear to my heart, because I didn't have the skills necessary. I didn't have skills to take with me to apply to the next challenge. I just figured out what these teachers wanted from me, and I gave it to them. And I'm not saying there's not value in that. Sometimes that is what a job requires. Sometimes that is what a relationship requires. Sometimes that is a skill. That is a skill, and it's valuable, but it didn't help me when I got into new and unfamiliar territory.
I can give you where it doesn't work from at least an academic standpoint.
Yeah.
My old boss, Josh, if you're listening, hello. His mother was a teacher, and so this was when he was in high school, I think. And he had a paper that was finished, getting ready to turn in, just laying out on the table. And his mom picked it up and read it, and she got really mad. And she went up to him and was like, "This is horrible. Like, what?" I said, Mom, calm down. What do you think about the title? And she's like, "The title's great, but it's like, that's not what you write about." And he's like, "Good title though, right? How about the first paragraph? What do you think about that?" She's like, "Again, I think you nailed the first paragraph, but everything after it just falls apart." Okay, but good first paragraph, right? How about the conclusion, Mom? What did you think about the conclusion? She's like, "It was a great conclusion, but it didn't relate to any of the other stuff you wrote." I said, "Mom, I'm going to get an A." And she said, "If you get an A, I'm pulling you out of that class." He got an A.
Wow.
He had figured out the game that, the teacher's going to go and read the first paragraph and the last paragraph and ignore the whole middle. And,
oh my gosh.
And so he figured that out.
Wow.
And it was, it's something we were talking about test prep earlier, but like it's that there is a skill in hacking something, right? And figuring out what's the fastest way to get through this thing that needs to get done. It doesn't build that authenticity and that love of learning. But I don't know, well, I know where I feel about it, but it's like, where does the blame belong for that? Was it him in not doing it? Was the teacher in only doing those parts? Was it the whole structure of the system that was put in place? How are we helping young people develop their writing skills? There's so many questions that get begged, but what ends up getting asked is, well, it was obviously the fault of the teacher and the student. And so, we'll fire the teacher and we'll put the kid in detention and the system lives on.
Right. Yeah.
When they were both products of the system, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Someone who's having to grade 40, well, that's if he's doing one class. If he was doing 3 or 4 or 5 classes, needs to grade 300-400 papers. What do you expect is going to happen?
Exactly.
And as a kid who doesn't understand the purpose of any of it,
Right.
I'm just getting grades. Like that's all. This game, it's been made clear to me that grades is the only thing that matters. Nobody actually cares if I learn anything or do anything. In fact, we just did a screening of the movie Most Likely to Succeed.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not familiar with that.
I think it's free with Prime on Amazon right now.
Oh, fantastic. I'll check it out.
Ted Dintersmith produced it and wrote a book along with someone else. I think he had a co-writer on it. But one of the things that really strikes me about it is, I should write this down because I can never remember which school or which district it was. But they took a end of the year test that kids had taken in the spring, and 2 months later given them the same test, except we weeded out the stuff that was like too minute to actually expect them to understand. And the average grade went from a B to an F.
Wow.
And so that's after showing like, look how much I learned.
Yeah.
But if you define learning as something that you can recall or remember, then you actually didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's a damning indictment of how we pretend to measure knowledge or measure learning.
Yeah. It is. I mean, that is one thing that makes me sad. And this opens up a whole other can of worms of why tutoring was more attractive to me than classroom teaching. But I have a student who I saw last night, actually, and she's in 3rd grade. She's the most enthusiastic learner I've ever met in my whole life, adults included. She just has a passion for it, and she loves to engage in the process. And last night she said to me, well, I always do my work on Wednesdays, but now they've started this lottery so that you do your work and then you can get a prize. And she goes, I think it's so sad that the teachers have to bribe the kids to do their homework. And I was like, well, not everyone's like you. Not everyone's as excited as you are. But I think to kind of your point earlier that, everyone's doing what they need to do either to be rewarded when it comes to a good grade or to just get by. Teachers have so many students, kids have so many obligations, parents are so overextended that everybody is just doing what is necessary to maybe not even succeed, just to survive in so many instances. And it's hard to watch that. It does sap the joy out of learning completely.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we focus on is like school isn't or shouldn't be something to survive, right?
Yeah.
This is a time to learn how to thrive, and we need to recapture childhood, right? It's been just like totally taken away. When I look at, especially high school students, they wake up early, they travel to school, they do school for 7 hours, they have a couple hours of homework, they're having to do a sport team and or volunteer at something. And so maybe they get to squeeze in dinner with the family, maybe not. And then they go to bed and crash at midnight and rinse and repeat. And they do it over and over. And we wonder why people struggle with this, work-life balance type thing. Well, what are we training them to do? And it's all in the name of college prep. And then when you get to college, you go to class for an average of 12 hours and you do 15 hours of homework, and that's it. So you have no idea how to even manage your life outside of that.
Absolutely. I can't speak to the internal experience of most of my students, but I know what I see and I know what I experienced, and it was going through the motions, mostly out of fear, not even in the pursuit of something that I was excited about. Just, if I don't get this grade, if I don't do well on these tests, and it was always catastrophic. I will be homeless. No one will love me. I will die alone in a gutter, and I've heard some of my students reiterate similar sentiments, and it makes me so sad to hear them feel that way, because fear is a powerful motivator, but it's not very inspiring, and it's difficult to see kids I care about endure that same pain.
Have you heard of High Tech High?
No.
So that's a high school, I think it's a group of high schools now in Southern California. It's the most likely to succeed followed a group there. But in that movie, one of the pieces, so this is a charter high school. So these are kids who came up through normal type schooling, and then they go into this very project-based, interdisciplinary, Socratic method, a lot of the stuff like what Greenfields does. And so they're interviewing them for the documentary, and one of the students was like super mad that the homework guide got taken away. And because how am I supposed to get my grades? Well, do you really care about the grade, or would you rather have learned that you can do something really amazing? And all of them were like, the grade.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it's terrible, but it's funny because it's so relatable, and it just, we have lost, I think, sight of the forest for the trees, or however that saying goes, that there are certain things that are widely acknowledged and applauded, and they're all external rewards, and it's that internal stuff that can't be measured that sometimes is the most important. And at the risk of airing really dirty laundry, I find myself continuing to struggle with that, because I continued to accumulate degrees, and now I've found work that I've loved, but I don't work 40 hours a week. And so there's part of me that's like, well, how do I make this bigger? How do I do more? How do I make this more visible? And every once in a while, I'm lucky to have a husband who recognizes it in me, and I recognize it in him, but we don't always recognize it for ourselves, where he is like, slow down. Do you get to spend your days reading and writing and engaging with kids you love? Yes. Why isn't that enough? Well, I don't know why that's not enough, because it's not, it's not more, and I'm programmed to want more.
It's certainly part of our culture. It's one of my biggest complaints about Wall Street, right? Where Wall Street doesn't actually add value anywhere, right? They're not actually running the companies. They're speculating, and the companies have to constantly grow or die, because the only way that the stock price increases is if you think that it's going to do better than I think it's going to do, then you're willing to pay me my number so you can have it at a higher number to sell to somebody else. And so I feel like we do take really healthy organizations and companies and destroy them in the name of you have to grow.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely. And it's stressful, and I find myself and I see my students and their families, it's easy to like lose yourself in that. I think we all become a little bit addicted to those feelings of go, go, go. And sometimes to have those quiet moments with yourself to really like turn inward and reflect can be very hard and very uncomfortable. It's just not the world we live in today. And so it feels very foreign.
Yeah, it's and like we like to complain about when we were in school, and it's only gotten like 15 times harder, right?
Oh my God.
And everything that's been put in place, it's all been about, well, just make them do more.
Right.
I was going to say, and nothing's been taken out, but that's not true. Like shops got taken out. Actually making stuff has been taken out.
Right.
Music's been taken out of a lot of school programs. Like these other things that, we've really narrowed it down to like 2 intelligences, right? And it's like, if you aren't good at these 2 things, then you're not worthy, but we're going to make you feel really bad about it for about 16 years. And then you can go do what you want to do.
And you don't even know how at that point, or do you even remember what you love to do? Yeah.
So one of the things I did want to talk about today is, you get a chance to work with kids who go to a bunch of different schools. What can you tell, like, are they having different types of experiences in the different types of schools that they go to? Are there different challenges that come out of the different types? Like, as a tutor, you're kind of brought in when something isn't going, quote unquote, as expected, right?
Right. Well, I mean, yes, there's lots of very different experiences. I work with students at private schools. I work with students at Catholic schools. I work with students at public schools. And, it does make a difference, the resources that a school has to offer. So sometimes I work with students who have learning resources available to them at school. And in the private schools, maybe they have a smaller classroom, so they get more attention. And so it does vary, but I will say that, this particular set of skills, the executive functioning, really, it kind of transcends whatever is going on in school. I would say there are some schools that I think are better about addressing these needs, and even when it comes to really simple stuff like color coding folders or writing assignments on the board and requiring students to take out their assignment notebook and write it down, which I really appreciate. I know it seems dated, and all the kids are like, but I do it on my computer. And I'm like, well, that'd be fine if you were getting your homework turned in. But considering that you're not, maybe let's talk about some other strategies. So I would say that, in terms of where I could see kids being the most successful, it is more project-based environment. It is places where they do have some leeway and some freedom to explore larger ideas rather than the more detail-oriented stuff that requires a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Just the expectation. I think this is where I often see my students running into trouble, and schools often getting in trouble, is this expectation that because you're in 8th grade, you know how to do this. Right. Instead of recognizing that, like, you are an 8th grade student and some of your peers do know how to do this, but because you're struggling with it, we need to give you tools and strategies to help support you as you develop these skills, not, scold you and punish you because you don't have them. They just take time and practice and attention and parental support and teacher support. And so obviously in schools where kids just get more attention, and that's not to say in big schools that teachers aren't absolutely doing their best. It's just an inherent challenge with having a lot of students, is you just are your resources to provide to one particular student are limited. So the more supports a school can provide, the better off a student is. But that's not to say that a student who's struggling in a large school, there's no hope. And, it takes a little bit more work at home, I think.
And I think the story you shared earlier of, if that family is capable of giving that support, right? Because a lot of the time with executive functioning stuff, some of that's just inherited problems. Or if it's not, they see it also as a weakness, right? Hey, I didn't have that problem. So this is obviously an effort issue. You're just not trying hard enough.
Exactly. And, sometimes it's cyclical because disruptive family events can lead to trouble in formulating these skills. And if mom or dad, the guardians are distracted, they don't have the ability to be present and provide that. But that is the situation that is perpetuating this. So, at the risk of shamelessly endorsing ourselves, that's why we exist, and sometimes I think that that's just valuable, period. Even if mom and dad have all the time in the world, that it's just a neutral third party that comes in. And, I would like to think I never hound a child, but I would imagine that sometimes they may feel that I am bothering them or asking things of them that they'd rather not do. And it does make it easier if I leave, mom and dad or guardians are going to be there. And so you want to preserve that relationship. So sometimes it's easier to just have someone who's not in the home being that person.
I think even the words I think most kids would use are different of how their parents talk to them versus a different adult saying the exact same thing.
Exactly. Yes. If I had $1 for every mom who said, I tell him that all the time. And I'm like, yes, I'm sure you do. But there's just something about a parent-child relationship that makes what you say sometimes easier to discard and sometimes much, much harder to discard, So it's a nice balance, I think, between it not resonating quite as deeply because my love and attention and acceptance of you is not reliant on you doing anything for me. And I'm a neutral party coming in and saying, like, I'm observing this. This is what I see here. You may have heard this before.
Yeah, it's we see it all the time.
I'm sure.
It's just like, and as a parent, the real hard part, you don't want to inflame it, right? It's
right.
Oh, so that's what Lindsay told you. Great.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
No,
I wish I would have thought of that.
I mean, I don't have kids, but I am married, so I know exactly how that goes. Wow, that's brilliant. I wish I had thought of that.
Can you tell it to me again? Maybe I'll write it down.
Yes. That sounds so smart. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think another aspect of that is difficult to deny is, especially with bright kids and particularly as kids get older, they do recognize if you are asking something of them that you're not willing to do yourself, or that you haven't been able to master yourself. And so there is that disconnect sometimes. And it's so easy. We're all human. We all have our weaknesses. But I think kids are particularly in tune to parental inconsistencies. How can you tell me to do that when I know that you're not doing it yourself?
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yes, exactly, which is a not very effective way of doing things.
Why should I do that? Because I told you so.
Right.
Yeah, we all end up there at some point.
I'm not saying yes, and that's something I try to emphasize to my parents is the parents I work with is, I'm not a parent. It's really easy for me to say, you just do this, ta-da, but I think what's most important is to have a goal that you're working toward and a set of maybe even aspirational goals, and your habits and your consistent behaviors are closer to what you're striving for than those terrible days where you do that exact thing you said you weren't going to do anymore. We all have those. That's part of being human, and you allow yourself to be human, but you still strive as much as you can to get closer to what the goal is.
Yeah. Now, parenting is a tricky animal.
I mean, I observe it, and it does seem that once you've mastered one corner of it, your kid grows and changes, and then you've got a whole new challenge. And one thing I do lament is I think it's an amazing opportunity to learn and grow as a person, to be a parent, what your kids reflect back to you, the ways in which you see yourself reflected, in addition to all the new unique components that your children bring. I just think that it makes for an unbelievable, journey.
Yeah, you can't, it's really hard to explain to somebody, and everybody says it, like, having children changed my life, right? Well, it did in ways that are so kind of foundational and subtle that having the words for them is difficult, right? It's just like, here's how I looked at the world from point A. Now I find myself on point Q, and the whole world just looks different. Everything, well, it's kind of the same and familiar. I'm definitely seeing it from a completely different viewpoint.
Yeah. And there's something just so magical and joyous about that too, to see the world through your children's eyes and to help them navigate. And, you hope impart the wisdom that you've gained from your experience. But I think that's the tricky balance, is how do you impart the wisdom you've gained and then also let them live their own life and face their own challenges and stumble on their own and get back up on their own, of course, knowing that you're there to love and support them, but that you can't walk their path for them.
Yeah, it's what's the phrase? You, as a parent, you are the bow, and the child is the arrow.
Oh, I've never heard that before. That's good.
You can launch it. You launch them off into the world, but you don't have any other control after that, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it sounds terrifying.
And I'm constantly amazed at how many analogies we have are all around military type things. Hit the target on the front lines.
Because you're dealing with a bunch of insurgents, that's why.
One other piece that, this is, we're recording this during Mental Health Month. I'd imagine there's a lot of reasons people end up struggling with their schoolwork and end up needing a tutor. We've talked a lot about the executive functioning side, and I think everyone can guess at the knowledge kind of gaps that show up or just need to be filled in one way or another. How much mental health challenges do you find as you're working with a student and unwinding it? Is that something that you see as a problem that we need to address in a bigger way, or is it more like, the kid's all right?
It's an integral part of it. It is. And even hearing you describe it as a problem, which I think is really common, is that it's part of being human. We all have mental health. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes we struggle. I will say we often get our clients through a diagnosis such as anxiety or ADHD. And so that's really where executive functioning is very visible, very prevalent. My goal is to bring this awareness to the general population as a set of skills that we all have, that we all can continue to work on. They've said, I've read that it contributes to longevity. If you can maintain your executive functioning skills as an elderly person, you're more likely to live longer. So it applies to everyone. But I do think that when it comes to learning, it's impossible to separate mental health from the rest of the picture, because if your emotions are getting in the way, not to get too sciencey, but all of your executive functioning and higher order thinking takes place in your prefrontal cortex. And so when your emotions flood your brain, you're taken immediately out of that part of your brain. You're taken back into the more primitive parts of your brain, and you react from a place of primitive reaction. You're emotionally flooded. So regardless of a student's unique and personalized struggles, there's just this human human element that is not as accounted for in traditional education. It's based on that factory model of bells ringing, content, tests, rinse and repeat. And who people are and how they learn, how they think, how they feel, what's going on at home are pieces of the puzzle that cannot be removed. And some kids are better at overcoming that than others. Some kids have more stable home lives that give them a sense of stability that allow them to approach it from a safe and stable perspective. But let's be honest, most kids don't. Most kids have something in their lives that is challenging, whether it's a relationship, whether it's their home life, whether it is a diagnosis, whatever it may be. Most kids aren't showing up at school just saying, I can't wait to learn today. So it's something that needs to be considered in conjunction with teaching anyone. I was going to say any child, but anyone.
I think that most kids actually show up at school the opposite way, where they're looking to nurture their mental health, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
They're there to hang out with their friends and to talk with them about things. And
definitely to feel good about themselves. Yes, absolutely. So I think it is something that has unfortunately been systematically removed from the process, but it really, if we were to find a way, and it sounds like you guys do and other schools are continuing to work toward that, to really weave that into the process, I think we'd have much happier, more well-adjusted kids who are prepared to thrive in the world outside of school.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself.
It sounds like you are putting it into practice yourself.
We certainly try. Got a couple new things we're going to try out with our high school students next year. One is kind of introducing the idea of the wellness wheel, and give them some life frameworks about how to think about life and you as a whole person. And so even if it's something that we're not directly covering or talking about in school, it's still something that you need to be looking at, and if you want to be in a good state of well-being.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to move beyond using happy and those types of words.
Yes. Oh, I think that something that I have really clicked into is just contentment and peace as of late. And to be honest, it feels really boring sometimes, but it feels nice. It's a nice boring, but it's not the ups and downs that I think we do become accustomed to.
When I was younger, I thought content was a bad word.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to that, always needing to grow.
Exactly.
What's content? This is good enough. It can be better.
And that's, something that I emphasize increasingly as I kind of figure out what the sweet spot is for so many of the families that we work with is, what does your sleep schedule look like? What is your exercise schedule? When are you eating? What kind of foods are you eating? And I know it sounds so cliche because it's emphasized in all the health classes, but without that foundation, it's very difficult to build upon it in a healthy and sustainable way.
I think some of it goes to underlying issues again, right? Where it's, staying up late is the only time I get to myself where I'm not being judged. Yes. Right. And so it's kind of like my safe place is when I'm alone in my room and everyone else has gone to bed.
Yeah. And I relate to that. I completely, I can totally understand that, but it is difficult then to have a successful next day if you're not operating on an adequate amount of sleep. And then all these things repeat themselves. It's so cyclical.
Yeah, and then that junk food is the only rush I get during the day. This horrible behavior that's horrible for my mental health is the only thing that feels like it's giving me any amount of mental health. There's got to be the things coming to a head in young people's minds.
Yeah, and I have so many students who will pride themselves on, they don't eat all day, and not in an eating disordered sort of way, but just like they get distracted, they're on the go, they don't have breakfast, they get to school, they're just go, 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 go. And then they'll have like a snack after school and they wonder why they can't sustain attention throughout the day. And, I think especially parents of high schoolers are like, well, they're older and they don't want to be told what to do by me. And I totally get that. And again, as a non-parent, I still think it's valuable to encourage them. But I think what's really more important as the kids get older is continuing to educate them on the importance, and not just, in a food pyramid sort of way, but like, let's check in. How are you feeling having not eaten all day? Do you feel a little crabby by any chance? Or, just tell me how that's going for you.
That's one of our jobs as guides, is to hold up the mirror, right?
Yeah.
So how's that working for you? How do you feel about that?
Exactly.
And I used to fast 2 days a month, and my coworkers would just be like, please just eat something. Like, oh my gosh, like, you are so crabby right now.
It's really funny you say that. Our neighbor in Wisconsin just encouraged me to do a 36-hour fast. And my husband looks at me and he goes, why don't you do that when I'm not around? So yeah, it is a universal truth.
Well,
easy and a much easier piece to put into place, I think. Habits are hard to build, but if it's a matter of eating an apple rather than sitting down and studying for an hour, I'd say eating the apple is the easier thing to do right now. And it's just building those little pieces upon little pieces.
Yeah, my eldest, man, you go down into his room and look in his trash can, and it's like, where did you get this stuff? And when did you eat it? Like, this is like, I'm getting physically nauseous looking at the amount of sugar that used to be in those containers.
That's how my sister was. She was like a little squirrel in her room. We'd open a drawer and there's like a bag of gummy bears, and and it's like, we were not really permitted to have a lot of junk food, but she found where there's a will, there's a way.
She knew where it was.
Yes.
So it's been great talking to you today, Lindsay.
It's been great talking to you, Rob. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, we got started right off the bat. I didn't even get a chance to welcome you to the podcast, so welcome.
Oh, very welcome, nonetheless.
And hi and bye. Is that But again, Lindsay is the owner at the Chicago Family Tutor. Lindsay, if they're interested in contacting you, what's going to be the best way for them to do that?
Well, you can email me at Lindsay, that's LINDSAY, at thechicagofamilytutor.com. And you can find us on Facebook at the Chicago Family Tutor, or Instagram at the Chicago Family Tutor as well. And our website is thechicagofamilytutor.com. So at least we keep it pretty easy, straightforward, consistent.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to make a guess here that it was very deliberate for you to call yourself the Chicago Family Tutor, because you wanted to be working with whole families.
Exactly.
Even if that's not as much as, you don't get to do that as much as you think would be helpful right now.
But plant that seed, and let everyone come to it in their own time.
It's very, very meditative of you, very zen.
Yes, I try. I have my moments. I try. It's an art, not a science. Yes.
You're putting out the invitation, and
exactly.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us today. Good luck with everything you do.
Well, thank you, Rob. You too.
And everybody else, we'll talk to you again on the next episode.